All right, good morning. I guess that's the handover to me. Well, welcome. Fantastic to be here. My name's Mark Torr, and I look after data and AI for Microsoft in Central and Eastern Europe. I have a bit of an echo on the line, but let's keep going. I think the pandemic's an interesting place. I haven't done an in-person presentation now for 18 months, and those of you that have watched me present in the past know that I love being on stage and I love doing demos as part of my presentations. Unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't come across when we go online in this form. So I'll try to do my best. I'll make this engaging. But I want to first of all start out by setting a little bit of context. And any big data presentation, any big data conference, we can't start without the obligatory statement that says we are today generating and collecting more data than ever before. And to be honest, probably in the last 18 months, we've collected more data than the entire history that we've had data flowing and digitization flowing. I think that we're seeing now the digitization of almost everything. If we think about the COVID pandemic, one of the things it's done is it's restricted mobility. And by restricting mobility, it's led to a sudden increase in this dependence on digital tools for providing and accessing services. And that means things like teleworking is coming to its own. We're really seeing everything now start to digitize far faster than it perhaps would have done in the past. So really what I'm saying here is that the speed of movement to digital and the increase of the amount of data is very rapid. I mean, if we step back just 18 months, how many people saw schools turn on remote learning overnight for their children? How many people saw doctors offering remote consultations pretty much overnight because people couldn't go into the surgery anymore? How many small retailers, as well as the large ones, had to move online quickly because their stores were closed and they needed to somehow find a way to get some income streams? These are just a few examples, right? And it's easy to place the pandemic at the center as a catalyst, but this presentation's not about the pandemic, right? It's really about the fact that the pandemic is the accelerant on a digital acceleration that was already going on before, but really is now accelerated, and it's going to just keep going from here. Even if the pandemic subsides a little, this acceleration is going to keep moving at hyperspeed. And there's really two factors behind this, right? There's this human factor, which is, let's not hide away from the fact that humans, their willingness to go online, their willingness to operate in a digital domain, that is something that has been a blocker, if you like, to this digitization. And now a large number of workers have just experienced working at home for a prolonged period using digital channels. That includes workers who wouldn't previously have done that, right? We've got this digital mind shift that's carrying over from our workplace into our outside life. We can add to that the elder population, right? Let's think about this, the older community who in the past, most of them didn't even know about or didn't want to do things like online shopping. But they've been forced into a situation where they've been able to shop from home, order their medicine online, or even, keep in touch with relatives through video calling and having things like doctor's consultations over tele-networking type ways. So, on top of that, we've got our digital native youth. They're already born and live digitally. So for them, nothing necessarily changed. If anything, it just made it easier for them to do more of what they love online. So really what we can say is that this human evolution, which normally is a slow genetic drift over generations, this pandemic really shook it. And it said, okay, now everybody has to go digital. Now, some people may go back. Some people probably will never go back. And then we've got the technological piece. And we've got to think about this as well. So we've got the humans having been forced online and go digital, so even communities that wouldn't have done that in the past. And then we've got this technological piece, right? And when COVID first hit, many businesses and governments were ill-equipped. The best ones had great data, they were online, they were digital. A lot of them weren't, right? And so basically what happened is as we started restricting movement, restricting physical access, all of these different places had to adapt very quickly to survive and deliver the services. And these virtual, let's say more economical approaches to business are probably going to become permanent even after the effects of the pandemic wane. Hopefully that's soon for all of us. And I think you can see that here. There was a recent survey done by a group called More in Common, and they sort of did a survey across the countries that have been hardest hit by COVID. So, this is directionally representative, right? And I'm sure you would find the same if we did this survey in Romania. And what it really shows you is more than 50% in many countries want to keep driving forwards. They want to use this moment in time, this shift to digitization, this shift to data-driven working as the catalyst to make changes in the country, far reaching, far beyond where we maybe are today. And then there's some others that, sort of want to go back to how it was. But I think, generally speaking, I think people want things to change going forwards. And there's a great slide and study done by McKinsey here. McKinsey, what they did is they took a look at the number of digital interactions, average customer digital interactions that were happening around the world. And what they discovered is that while, from 2017 to 2019, there'd been a sort of steady increase going up. What they actually discovered is that when the pandemic hit, because everything went digital, we basically got what they had predicted to be 3 years or 4 years of growth in, 1 year. So we really saw a dramatic shift to the number of customer interactions online. Now, you can think about this a little bit, and you can say, okay, Mark, this is great. Pandemic information, we're at a big data conference here. As soon as we start interacting online, as soon as we start seeing more time online, doing online shopping, purchasing groceries online, which was something people, just never even considered in the past. I think you understand that that requires data. As you start to gather more data, people then start to expect different services. They expect to see services that are personalized to them. They expect to see services that are relevant to them. They expect to see online help. We see support through banks. We see governments moving quickly to provide their services and various other elements of what they do in a digital form using data. And we can think about retail, but actually you can select almost any industry in a business to consumer mode and everything's moved digital. And B2B, it still looks slightly different, but still there, a massive amount's moved online. And one great example right in Romania is Regina Maria. And I think many of you know Regina Maria. They started a journey with actually Microsoft a little while ago, where they started offering digital interactions with their doctors. And, as the pandemic hit, this became, a lifeline for them because people couldn't come anymore into the surgeries. So they adopted the Azure communication service into their own app, and they're now doing a lot of their interactions and a lot of their consultations over video conferencing. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they are able and are willing and can now interact with things like AI as part of this application. So they can turn on things like translation. So you can enable people who don't speak Romanian to interact in this app. They can use the technology for blind people to read out loud what's being said so that they can see it, for deaf people to have subtitles so they can understand what's going on. So basically, they're going to create an accessible digital service here. And the other thing, as a side effect of this, is they discovered there were a whole collection of Romanian people who lived outside of Romania that would love to access this service. And so now they're expanding this service and offering additional sort of packages, if you like, to let people outside of Romania interact with Regina Maria. And, if we think about retail and go back, so let's switch from doctors to retail. I think there is no new normal in terms of going back. I think retail's changed forever. And I think this is, really clear. This bricks and mortar world will continue, but it will look very different to before. And I think increasing numbers of people are going to operate online. And we still see customers, focusing in on this. So a great example is Lenta. They're a Russian retailer. And even before the pandemic, they were working on better forecasting. It's a classical retail machine learning big data problem. How do I forecast what's going to be purchased at every store, at every SKU, at the lowest level of granularity? That became an even bigger issue during the pandemic, because what happened is all of previous rules almost went out of the window. We had panic buying, we had supply chain problems. So forecasting and making sure that you were getting enough things in became super important. And so, companies who previously had relied on years and years of experience of trying to do this based on normal shopping patterns, they struggled. Those who had built data systems at the beginning, of course, they also have some of those challenges, but they optimize very quickly based on the changing circumstances that you can see in the data. So I think, retail and forecasting and the use of data to drive better forecasting is a super interesting use case that is actually only going to get more critical, because, this just-in-time way of operating, I think a lot of people realized during the pandemic that just-in-time is very dangerous. And so now they're trying to figure out how to have more than just-in-time, but not too much that things are going to spoil or not be sold and will need to be marked down and sold at a lower margin. Okay, so Lenta have gone from several days of forecasting at a higher level down to bringing all the data together and then doing multi-SKU, multi-store forecasting for every single day. And another one that's interesting is pharmacies. And I'm on purpose choosing a bit like the doctors and the pharmaceutical companies interspersed with retail. I'm doing it that way because I want to show you that actually there is no industry and no business that isn't changing. Right? So look at this. Amazon is launching Amazon Pharmacy in the US, right? So let's think about this for a second. Amazon is a purely digital company. They're not interested in bricks and mortar, really. So what that tells you is that pharmaceutical companies or pharmacies are moving online. We are moving to digital prescriptions, digital pharmacy. Everything's moving online around pharmaceuticals. It used to be that you went to the pharmacy to be able to speak to a pharmacist and get some assistance and some advice. Nowadays, you can do that over video. You can do that with an AI bot. You can have remote consultations. You can have apps that can check your prescriptions or even give you digital prescriptions. And then you can have delivery to the door same day or next day. So, this is changing fundamentally even the pharmacy industry. And again, it's driven by data and it's driven by AI and it's driven by personalization and a number of other services. And, one example of this that we have is Walgreens coming out of the US, but they're not the only one. We're working with companies in CE. I'm just not able to talk about them right now. But effectively, what they've done is they've pulled all of this together and they're trying to do rapid prescription processing. So they're able to receive and process prescriptions very, very quickly now, whereas in the past it was much slower. And then they're moving to the view that they can start offering, pharmacy advice on demand across the US and much, much more. So let's just reflect back a bit on technology, because I just talked about some use cases there. But what I didn't talk about was the speed at which some of those changes have actually happened. So humans started to accept and need digitization. And as a result of that, we basically have driven companies to react. And for many years, because the human, let's say, moment in time wasn't there, we looked at our technology stack and our legacy, and we said, look, we can't move it. It's going to take too long. It's too complicated. It's working today. Don't kick it. Don't wake up the sleeping dog. When the pandemic hit and companies were forced to move, what they actually found is that it was possible to move much more quickly than ever before. And I think this is a really interesting slide, because what it shows you is, based on a study of a number of different use cases, how quickly companies could move in reality compared to what they expected. So for example, right? Some of them are obvious. So increase in remote working, right? I'm just going to start on this top one here. Let me get my laser pointer on. Increase in remote working and or collaboration. You can see here, people expected that would take, over a year. And in fact, what they found is they could do it in days. And that's an extreme case because everybody had to do it, and it's a packaged application, and it's a secure turn on, give access type approach. But what's also amazing is when you come to the things that we're here to talk about today, which is the use of data to improve our operations, the use of AI to improve our bottom line, top line, launch new projects, make better decisions, you find that these things were also things that people expected to take, in some cases, upwards of 2 years. But those companies who actually were forced to do it as part of the pandemic, they found they could do this at least 25 times faster than they expected. This is not necessarily the final product or the final solution, but this is going from we have nothing to we have something that lets us get going, that lets us get back to business, lets us be more efficient, lets us be more intelligent. And this is quite a remarkable feat. And often when we talk about data, big data and analytics, we get stuck in this view that ultimately we think, hey, we can't do anything because we're waiting for the technology to break that we have, or it's going to take too long, it's too risky. And it's not the case. Those who are brave enough to go can make this happen really, really quickly. And I think, again, this is, reflected in the mindset of executives that, we see out there. And I see this in my discussions as well. I was talking to a CIO and CTO, it's got both titles, of a company recently, and they're like, okay, look, we just have to go on this now. There is no choice. We don't know how long this situation is going to persevere. But to be honest, those who have gone are already moving ahead of us, and we've got to move quickly to catch up. So if you look at it, if we look in 2017, people were looking at technology primarily as a source of saving money, okay? And that's completely changed. In the recent survey that was done, obviously we've got modernizing the core to keep up with competitors. If your competitor moved online and you're not online now, and if you're not using data and they are, and if they've got personalization and AI, and if they're offering remote consultations with AI accessibility built in and you're not, then you have a problem. So it's really about modernizing the core to even keep up. So this is not innovating in some ways, it's actually just keeping up with what's suddenly happened very rapidly. Of course, there's still some savings there, but let's say now we have 40% focused on saving and just keeping in line with our competitors. Then we have 38% who are investing more to get a competitive advantage. Now, why is that so different? Well, I would argue that many companies have now started collecting data, and now they've realized that they can start using that data to make a competitive advantage. And so now we're seeing a lot more companies saying, hey, okay, let's try and use this data to get ahead. Let's try and use it to offer a better service, or to do this service more cheaply, or to open up to a slightly different market. And then the last one is refocusing the entire business. And that's generally a bit different. That's about, changing the direction of the company, not just trying to make existing processes and services better and more intelligent and stand out, but actually maybe recreating whole new business lines, recreating or creating new products. And that's kind of the 19%. But effectively, nearly 60% of the audience believe that the future is about investing in competitive advantage and moving and being more smart. And that's big data, that's analytics. So, the way I often talk about this is I look at these 3 time horizons. And by the way, a lot of people see this chart. This is well known to a lot of different people, but I think people see Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3 as today, tomorrow, far in the future. I see it as you need to be working on all 3 of these at the same time. Now, actually, the real sort of timeline behind this is the expected ROI. So things you're doing in Horizon 1 should have an ROI very quickly, within 6 months to 12 months normally. Things you're doing in Horizon 2, somewhere between 12 months and 18 months, maybe. Horizon 3 normally is 18 months plus, right? Because to build new products, create new markets takes time. But you don't work on these sequentially. You need a strategy that's attacking all of these at the same time. And if you overlay that study that I showed before, you basically have the saving money and catching up with my competitors in Horizon 1. You have investing in more technology to make better decisions and have competitive advantage in number 2. And then you have refocusing the business in 3. So thinking about your big data strategy, thinking about your AI and data usage, you need to be thinking across 3 time horizons, not just in the single one. And this is something we get stuck on a lot of times. And I think the way to think about this is we have to also break data and AI away from being a singular topic. So of course, we've got to modernize our entire data estate. Of course, we've got to bring our data together. Of course, we've got to try to get a single view of our customer, a single view of our product. We've got to bring all of that in and run some analytics over it. We've got to reason over that data, find patterns, use that data to drive better decisions. But actually, what's become really clear is those who really succeed while doing the data piece are actually working on the applications too, because to be honest, there's very few databases without applications and very few applications without databases. So you need to bring these things along together. When you bring AI, for example, the transcribing services, the translation services, when you bring that into an application like the Regan and Maria one with remote consultations, that's when you get something that's really cool and really unique, that really delivers a service. If all you have is a translation service in AI, it's interesting, but it's not applied into something that can drive your business. So one of the things we're talking to organizations about, again, is they've got to be thinking about not just this big data and AI story, but how they're infusing that into what they're doing to modernize the applications. Because actually, for most of your end customers, most of your end users, it's the applications that they're using that actually are the interface to the big data and AI services and work that you're offering. And again, you can paste the 3 time horizons here. You can paste the, let's just update my core. Let's migrate things. Let's, tidy things up. Then let's, bring more competitive advantage by bringing analytics and AI into the discussion. And then let's redesign our business and our operations and how we interact with customers. Okay, so that's kind of setting the scene. I think, I wanted to talk about this change. I wanted to talk about some cases there. I wanted to talk about my view that pandemic has really changed a lot. It's not just changing the use of data, the collection of data, it's changing the applications and how they're consuming and leveraging data. It's changing the way people are interacting with our organizations and our processes. And then I wanted to do 3 more things in this presentation. I've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go quickly. I wanted to share some of my recent favorite real-world AI stories that obviously reflect from Microsoft. And then I want to talk about what I think is going to be the next big AI topic, but very high level, very quick. And then I wanted to just finish up with something that's very close to my heart that I think we all need to sort of think about as we go on this journey. So the first one is a recent sort of story that we've got again in Romania. You may all know Same Day, the logistics company, and they've got the Easy Box lockers. Well, basically, they are using AI to do a lot of things behind the scenes. They're collecting data. That data is coming together, and they're using AI to streamline inventory areas, logistics, and many other elements of their business. So AI is a fundamental element in terms of what Same Day is doing to deliver the optimal service to draw you into what they are providing to you. Another example, which you may have heard of in the past, again in Romania, and I've chose a couple in Romania here, so you can see this is AI in action in Romania. You may know AFIR, you probably know it better than I do, but basically they gather grants from the EU and they distribute them to farmers. And what they are doing is they're using AI to better forecast and analyze and this is done by our partner Genisoft, but they're using this to basically come up with spending and finance requirements, forecast what's needed so that they can direct the right grants to the right farmers at the right time. And that's really interesting. 2 billion euros of EU funding now flowing through that AI-driven process. Another one is Fintech Os. I don't know if you know them, but Fintech Os is quite an interesting organization, and they're trying to build out some new financial services solutions. And one of the big challenges here is how do you onboard new customers, especially in a remote world where you can't have them come into your bank, sit down with their passport, look at them, and do all of those fun things. So, there's been a lot of work gone off with Fintech Os to bring together an applications, to develop that application out, but also then to infuse into the application cognitive services, which is AI from Microsoft packaged, so that we can actually help them to do recognition of people and things like that. And we've seen cases like this as well in Czech Republic, for example. When the pandemic hit, access to public services, in many cases, you needed to turn up with your identity card or your passport. And what they actually did is they built into some of their services the ability to do recognition using cognitive services. And through that, they were able to allow people to authenticate and gain access to systems. And, if we look at Fintech Os, they've gone from a 3-day paper-based process to a 15-minute digital journey to onboard a customer. So that's the digitization process really in action right there. One of my favorite stories that emerged over the summer is BIC. BIC is, you may know them, but Satori Analytics is our partner in Greece, and BIC has done something really interesting. They have basically come up with a small shaver, and they've put in some sensors, and it sends data back from shaving sessions. And that data that comes from shaving sessions is then analyzed using machine learning. And they use that actually to redesign and to change and tweak the BIC razor so that it's more appropriate and works. So this is an example of using AI in the R&D process. And basically now what they can do is they can create these different types of razors, but they can also create personalized shaving experiences through an application, which is, super interesting. And then the last one today I wanted to talk about in terms of use cases was Metinvest. This is a manufacturer, it's a steel maker. And one of the things that they're doing is, clearly at the moment, and this is probably even more appropriate given the global energy crisis that's unfolding, the lack of sort of gas, the high prices. One of the things that they've been working on is, can we use machine learning in order to reduce fuel usage in furnaces? Can we use it to reduce the silicon content and variability in the products, which affects the quality of the product? And so what they did is they took one furnace to start with, and they've been collecting the data for a while. And then they've been working with machine learning to analyze that data, analyze patterns, and make tweaks to the inputs and the outputs. And they've been able to reduce the silicon content by, it looks small, 0.15%, but they're already one of the leaders in the industry, and this saves them massive amounts of money and raises the quality of their steel. And they've reduced the fuel requirements. They won't tell us by how much. They say it's saving them a significant amount of money, and I'm sure that that's gone up by twofold in the last sort of month as the crisis sort of took hold around access to gas and energy. So again, a good example again from CE. This one's in Ukraine. So we've had Ukraine, Greece, Romania. Obviously, Walgreens was the United States, but it just goes to show that big data and analytics is, prevalent almost everywhere. So the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to pause on this, and I wanted to reflect on what I think is the next big thing in AI. Okay, and it's not something that I would say is inherently new. It's something that's been around for a little bit of time, but it's been around more in academic circles. And that something is reinforcement learning, okay? And it's a very nascent and a pretty hot area in in machine learning nowadays. And if you look at, most of the 2019, 2020 predictions that came from Forbes and Gartner, you're going to see that most of those articles have reinforcement learning at the center. Sometimes they mention the techniques, explicitly. But actually, the important thing here, IDC is predicting that by the end of this year, 15 to 20% of customer experience applications will be hyper-personalized on a continuous basis because of reinforcement learning. Now, let me sort of step back a second, because I know I'm not in a technical track here, so I'm not going to go deep, but I just want to explain to people what is reinforcement learning, okay? And I think the way to think about this is that if we think about supervised learning, which is the way a lot of machine learning works today, okay, there's a bit of unsupervised, but let's say it's mostly supervised learning. What we do there is we take historical data, then what we do is we predict some outcome from that data. And reinforcement learning does something different. What reinforcement learning does is it uses AI agents that actually learn from people doing things. That could be a person in real life, it could be a simulation, but they learn from doing. And what happens is a reinforcement learning agent decides on an action to take. So for example, I'm going to make this decision. It watches what happens, and then based off of that, it will actually see if that was a positive or negative decision, and then update its engine and its work. So basically, over time, the feedback coming in, the model learns that the decision's good and it updates itself, or it learns it's bad, and then it learns from that feedback and adjusts itself so it makes a better decision next time. Okay. And here's a slide that shows some of the different supervised learnings, predicts outcomes, reinforcement learning, sequential decision making to act. Supervised learning generally needs somebody to sit down and label the data. This is a cat, this is a dog. The other one uses feedback. It says, I think this is a dog. Somebody says, no, it's a cat. And then it learns, and next time it hopefully makes the better prediction up front. On the supervised learning, the model tries to minimize the errors. So you have an R squared and you're minimizing errors. In reinforced learning, actually, sometimes making errors is good, but you get more information from making those errors that you can then adjust so that you can optimize and drive better outcomes. In supervised learning, the model degrades over time. And that's interesting. So as soon as you deploy a model in supervised learning, it starts to go out of date. So you need a lot of time and effort to update that model and get it back to the right place. Whereas in reinforced learning, that model generally gets better over time. So it starts off in a good state and hopefully, keeps going forwards. So, the point here is these are not mutually exclusive. You're going to use both of them, but we see now an increasing, need to think about reinforced learning, especially as people are moving online. Okay. And, there's a lot of theory around this. There's a lot of algorithmic discussions. There's a lot of people doing, demos that make the geeks in us all get excited. But I think the important thing here is to think about how we bring this into the commercial world and how we can make it available. And, we have 4 projects at Microsoft that we're working on. Project Paida here is kind of an interesting one. It's a platform for game developers where we've got a reinforcement learning platform they can use, but rather than rewarding people for sort of beating the player, the algorithm is working on rewarding if the player is having fun while playing. So the aim here is to use reinforcement learning not to beat the player necessarily, but to make it so that the player is sort of happy and is having a good gaming experience. Autonomous systems, not new. The idea of simulation and other things, I think that's there. But most autonomous systems and simulation today, they do specific tasks repeatedly. And in those particular cases, they don't adapt. And then we've got machine learning, where we bring all of what we're doing and make it available to you, and the Azure personalizer. Again, these are things that we do to bring the technology out. The Azure personalizer, that's our first general availability reinforcement learning product. And it's being used, for example, right now in our Xbox store and MSN. So we have personalized recommendations and the model learning on the fly as you work inside of our space. So I've only got a couple of minutes left, but I think in that couple of minutes, I want to focus on this topic before I wrap up, which is responsible AI. Everything we've talked about today is using people's data, it's collecting data, and it's using AI to reason over that data and make decisions. And, you know, with data and AI comes a lot of power for companies and organizations, but also comes a lot of responsibility. So when we look at this inside of Microsoft, we think about our belief in AI, which is we can use it to amplify human ingenuity and work with humans. It's not to replace humans. And I think, you know, we're looking for using AI that respects human rights, reflects diversity of society. We've got to work with others to do it. And we've got to really think about where we're using it. And there is no compromise in pursuing AI and responsibility. You must be responsible first and then do AI second. And I think, you know, when we look at our principles, we actually have 6, and I won't go into them here for the purpose of time. But I would encourage everybody watching this, especially if you're in the C-level of a board, the same way we have a CSO that's looking after GDPR and privacy and handling that, you are going to need to have somebody in your company that is working on your responsible AI policy and approach. Because if you get this wrong, your brand will suffer greatly. So as we look at big data and AI, as we look at this momentum wave that's going off, please make sure that you're balancing that with having responsible AI policies and responsible AI as a core element of what you're doing. Now, with that, I've gone really, really quickly. I apologize for that. I hope to be with you in person sometime in the future. I hope that this was a good presentation and that you at least took something out of it in terms of use cases. I wish you a fantastic rest of day, and I look forward to joining you in Romania in the future. Thank you.